Hello, welcome to the introduction for session 3 of our small group study of Romans. This week we're looking at verses 18 through 25 of chapter 1. At our last discussion, we mentioned that it's not hard to make a case for saying that, number one, here in verse 18, Paul is finally actually getting started with what he really wants to say. And number two, what he really wants to do is preach the gospel, which I think is different than presenting the gospel. Presenting the gospel, I think, has to do with the Great Commission, relating the way of salvation to people who have never heard. But on the other hand, the preaching of the gospel is something that every believer needs all the time, which is why that's exactly what Paul wants to do in this letter that is written to believers. Either way, preaching or presenting, we often start with some description of man's predicament apart from Christ. So, if we're on the right track here, that what Paul is finally getting started with his actual message and what he wants to do is preach the gospel, then does this next chunk, the text, does it fit with that understanding? I think it does. And regardless of everything else Paul's going to say in the next couple of chapters about man's situation, I think what we have here in these few verses this week is a really deep and essential summary of it. So what kind of threads can we find to pull on as we try to get inside Paul's head and understand things the way he does, as we try to complete the communication process? I have a couple of suggestions, and I know that you're going to find a lot on your own too. First of all, can you find a linking thought between the beginning of this chunk and the end of the one that went before it? In Paul's opening statement, as he gets to verses 16 and 17, he has built to a crescendo, a beautiful statement that many people feel summarizes the entire book of Romans. And I think that what he says in that crescendo links directly into verse 18 as he really gets rolling. So see what you think. How does that logical connection work, and what is the word that's involved there? Number two, Paul uses the personal pronoun they a lot in this, between verse 18 and the end of the chapter. It might be worth just pondering a bit. What specific group of people does he have in mind when he uses that word? Is it a huge deal? No, probably not. But he uses it a lot here and almost nowhere else in the letter. So it's probably worth considering. Number three, look at the verbs he uses as he talks about they, as he describes what they did and didn't do. And what is he indicting them for? In particular, there's one verb, at least in the NAS and the ESV, that's used twice and which I think goes right to the heart of sin. So see if you can find that in whatever translation you're using, and see whether you can think of another word that we use more often these days to describe the same thing. Number four, it's our old question, so what? What value does this passage this week hold for us? I think there might be at least two subheadings under that. One relates to us. How does this passage inform us as we live the believing life? And the other one relates to the unbelieving world around us. How does this passage equip us for interacting with our culture on the basis of facts about what their situation really is and how they got there? How can we use the understanding that God gives us in this passage as we seek to take the gospel winsomely to our neighbors? That's all. Thank you.